My name is Kassandra Pierre Bedell. I am a VP for a global bank currently. I live in the United States in Tampa, Florida, sunny, hot Tampa, Florida. And this talk presentation basically is a mashup of multiple identities that I have. First, as a technologist, I love technology. Second, as someone who has been in and around mental health for almost my entire life, as a practitioner, a support person, a caregiver, a family member, a friend, and also, as someone who has utilized mental health services throughout my adult life. So, I've been trying to coalesce the topic and bring it to you all. So, let me jump in here. Alrighty, slide one. My title is Belief Systems and Digital Innovation in Mental Health, Designing Tools That Heal and Not Harm. So I come to this work from a very unique intersection as a technologist, as a product manager, trained working in finance, but also as a Black Caribbean woman and a provider and a consumer of mental health services. I was born and raised in the US Virgin Islands, and my parents are from Trinidad and Tobago. So just although we were both from the Caribbean, there still were so many differences in how my parents grew up versus how I grew up. And now, as someone living in America, that's just another layer of an identity. My first career started in education. So I was working with children in special education, many who had behavioral difficulties. I did that for about 10 years as a crisis interventionist. Then I went on to administration. Then I went on to facilitating mental health, depression, and anxiety support groups for adults for over a year. Um, and then went on to work in inpatient mental health. So, layered on top of that, too, someone who has been in organized therapy for almost 2 decades and see that as a huge support and benefit to my overall development. It puts me in a very interesting position to then go on to design tools for this space. So I'll give you an overview of what I'm going to discuss today. It's a lot, so I'll try to keep it moving so we can get to some questions at the end, but this is the overview. I'm going to break down kind of my thought pattern on this space, and then we can discuss at the end. Um, the mental health discussion is a rare yet interesting conversation. I think one that is bound to be different once it does occur in a Caribbean household. Um, there are just so many things happening in the Caribbean with these identities, with the need for mental health support. Mental health wasn't something that's openly talked about or discussed. I don't recall hearing mental health conversations as they happen today when I was coming up in school. It definitely wasn't discussed in church. And I do believe there's still a very pervasive and collective assumption, not just in the Caribbean culture, but also in Black American culture, that if you need mental health support services, there's something wrong with you or you're suffering from some kind of personal um, weakness. So many people in the island, I believe, have heard or will say that, you know, um, they heard growing up that if you have a issue, if you're depressed, if you're sad, you need to kind of stay strong. You need to pray about it, reach out to your prayer warriors and your faith family. Um, but you shouldn't ever let anyone know that you're struggling. You should put on your brave face and don't show your weakness. And as a child, I vividly remember hearing adults around me, as a family that we went to church a lot, but I remember hearing adults saying, you kind of don't talk about these things with other people. You keep it in your family, you bring it to your prayer circle. I remember, broaching conversations at the dinner table with my parents who were very open-minded. And, I would still see that slight hesitation of the brief recoil, when you want to bring these things up and talk them through. So the message was loud and clear. I heard it, and many of my, friends have heard it that, private matters stay in the house. We discuss personal things behind closed doors. You don't go to school and talk about things. you leave it in the house. And I've heard similar things from my African friends, my Indian friends, my Hispanic friends. They all heard this message too and received it, growing up. And although there's a lot of benefit to keeping things in community, we now know how that distributed support system is so beneficial. Once you leave the house, you go out into the world, the more people that have your back, the better. So that belief, I feel, it's like almost epigenetic, right? It passes down through the generations. This need to be strong, the need to put the brave face on. It taught us resilience. I think part of the, internal strength that I have definitely comes, from my ancestors or from my parents. It taught us how to push through, definitely taught me how to be independent. Absolutely. But deep down inside, I definitely believe that I was predispositioned to fighting through things, and asking for help or looking for support became a secondary thing. And I really believe there are things that I've struggled through as an adult that could have been possibly, you know, um, alleviated earlier had I had that initial inclination to reach out for help. And to this day, I still struggle with it. I had the same conversation yesterday with my therapist about, I feel like it's almost like an insatiable or primitive drive to do something for myself, to retreat in solitude. As a natural introvert, I kind of like to get by myself and my hidey hole and figure things out on my own. I don't like to burden, quote unquote, burden people with my issues. And then I like to reemerge in as a whole person again. But then it led me to ask, like, why is this something that I do when I have support around me? I have friends, I have family, people that care about me. And it has taken many years, I believe, on my own journey navigating depression, anxiety, and burnout, to even admit to myself that I needed additional support beyond what was outwardly acceptable in my culture. So now, as someone in this space, as a product manager and technologist and an entrepreneur building systems that serve people globally, I find myself asking regularly what happens when these cultural belief systems, or the way that we think, the way that we believe, the way that we see the world, hit up against the belief systems of the people building these solutions. People in Silicon Valley, people in New York City. What happens when this mashup, comes together? What is the end result? So think about, from where you're sitting, the messages that you may have heard coming up. How do you think those things developed you as a person? Were you receiving supportive messages? Were they silent? Were they slightly dismissive? Did your parents recoil too? How do those early belief systems still show up in the way that you care for yourself, for your family, for your friends, for others, for the people that you design or that you build for? So I want to kind of explore that a little bit more, the tension between our cultural narratives that we receive and then also this digital innovation. As we build technologies and solutions for people, we want to be able to heal and to support, but are we then also downloading our cultural narratives, our belief systems into the technology that we build? Are we encoding that harm into the tool? This is what kind of started this conversation and this topic, and I think it's a very fascinating thing to think about. And then, more importantly, if that is something that happens as a result of the process, then how can we do better in designing tools that help and not harm? So let's start, I think, with the exciting part. I think not even the last decade, last 5 years, and now with the proliferation of AI technology, innovation has exploded, specifically in this digital mental health space. We have a million, literally a million apps that you can use. If you have insomnia, you can't sleep, whatever, like there's an app for it. You can do the mindfulness things. You can reach out to a chatbot and talk to them about a crisis. They can, provide therapy. You could track your mood, your sleep, your stress levels. You could even find a therapist on an app if you need it. And this is all incredibly powerful um, and promising. And technology now is creating accessibility for folks. People in rural areas now have access to clinicians and to support. It's scaling, right? These support systems, and there's a level of personalization that we're seeing now that we have not seen before, which is excellent. But on the flip side, we have to ask ourselves, right? Whose value systems are being encoded in these solutions, right? Whose experiences, whose mental models with all of the different, psychoanalytic dynamics and belief systems and ways of providing therapy, et cetera, et cetera. How is that then being encoded in the solutions that are being developed? And then also, like, whose collective trauma, right? We're coming to the space with who we are, and who we are is based on how we grew up, and how is all of this kind of transferred into the solutions that are being created. This kind of sent me down a rabbit hole as I was thinking about it. And then ultimately, right, who is this universal user? What are the personas that we're trying to support and solve for? What are the assumptions that we're coming to in the space as we build, or as we're trying to create these solutions? And one thing that I'm realizing is that there are some embedded beliefs or assumptions that we bring to the table when we're doing this work. And they come out when you start to test and you're having focus groups. They pop out at you. For example, a lot of times we assume that our user is going to be someone who is well resourced, right? They're going to come from a community that has access to the means to solve a problem. Someone who may have money could buy the phone where the app is on, or have access to electricity to charge the battery, or they have free Wi-Fi. Like, these are all assumptions that we make. Someone who's tech literate, right? As your app grows and scales, they have the ability to learn to continue to use your app. That's a assumption. Um, Someone who's culturally aligned to Western clinical models, understanding how therapy, quote unquote, is conducted, or how your path to wellness will be laid out based on, a specific way of providing emotional and psychological support. That's an assumption. Um, and then lastly, someone who's comfortable providing their information to a digital tool. Some people are just really wary about even speaking to other humans and sharing deep, dark secrets. Now we're asking them to do that with an app or with a piece of technology. My husband jokes a lot about the robots coming for us and ripping our arms off because of AI and all of those things. I find it funny, but that mistrust comes from somewhere. Are we just assuming that people are going to get over it, or how are we solutioning for those fears? Something to think about. And when we assume, what happens is we leave out tens of millions of people, particularly those from communities like mine that have grown up with belief systems and live their life with belief systems, and now are faced with kind of coming out of that in order to have access to tools that may help them. So let's take a popular app like Headspace, or a similar one where you can, find meditation and, uh, relaxation, exercises, so on and so forth. Headspace says that their mission is to provide every person access to lifelong mental health support through evidence-based meditation, so on and so forth. All of which is great, right? It introduces the concept of mindfulness to people who may not know what that is. I remember one of my first therapy sessions as someone in their early 20s, my therapist talking about it. I had no idea what he was talking about, even after going to school for psychology, but that's another, a whole other uh, discussion. But, he laid the framework, he provided me with some tools, and it's something that I use to this day. But an app like that could also assume that, we just have time throughout our day to meditate, right? No one's having to fetch water or, watch four kids, or that they have a private space, they have their own apartment, um, or even understand and see the value in something like meditation. So imagine, a mom of three a single mom of three who's struggling, with the kids, and she's stressed at her job and all of these things, living in a house with grandma and her brother and his wife. This is common in many parts of the world. Or someone where, in their culture, meditation feels foreign, right? Or weird, or even wasteful, right? You're sitting and you're not doing anything. That's a value that could come out in this dynamic. Is that app, or I want to call a headspace, but something like that, is it really meeting them where they are based on who they are and how they show up? Then to think about. So I've been working a lot lately with like with vibe coding, like no low code and no code platforms, and kind of running my own testing. I have a lot of kind of these little ideas in my head about things that I think could be good solutions. I try to mock them up and create some MVPs. And in one of my own projects that I was working on a couple of weeks ago, I made that assumption, right? The everyone has an individual smartphone and access to electricity and internet, et cetera, et cetera. And this particular app was for prepping for storms. And I realized that I made huge assumptions, right? Just in the fact that, devices could be shared. Some people may be on a prepaid phone. And then again, this privacy concerns of putting your information into a device. Um, so it was a great idea, but not one that, would be transferable in terms of a solution to many different personas, not just culturally or geographically. So it kind of sent me back to thinking through some of these issues, and then also provided a good support for this argument that, perhaps we need to think a little bit more about who we are supporting, who we are solutioning for. Um, Innovation is great, but where are the gaps? Where are the holes? Um, Another thing is that innovation can also set us up to reinforce beliefs that may be harmful, right? So, for example, leveraging an app to diagnose yourself. I think in during the pandemic is where we kind of saw a lot of this. A lot of innovation came out because of, for the need of social connection that we were all missing. But I think in some circumstances we kind of skewed far to an alternate reality where apps were given probably much more I wouldn't say value, but we were leaning heavily on the context that they could provide or the information that they could provide. Um, Apps and innovation sometimes also look at individual solutions and put, you know, unnecessary on the individual to kind of solution themselves out of a space when support may be a valid alternative in that moment as well. And then we all know about data and algorithms and how those are leveraged to pull people in based on a specific persona or identity. And many times, we can't solve for everyone. So we kind of get that broad brushstroke of solutions for everyone. If the data that builds the algorithms are biased, how are we serving everyone? We can't. Quick question. Who do you think is the default user in the UK? Who do you think is the default user in Africa or in the US? how are these solutions that we're developing being tailored to that default user? And where are the problems or the implications with those brushstrokes? Just a quick question. If you want, you could drop some answers in the chat and we can discuss it at length a little after. Um, Carrying on, let's take a step back and then kind of look at how, these cultural identities intersect with innovation and then with technology in the Caribbean where I'm from. Like I said, mental health is still stigmatized. Um, I think it's changing. We still have a lot of work to do. Um, the collective understanding of the collective appreciation for mental health services and support may be changing, but then we still see it deprioritized in things like government funding, or access to community mental health services or healthcare. I remember my dad telling me back home, the one psychiatrist on the island recently retired after serving for over 50 years. So we have an island or three islands um, with over maybe 300,000 people not having access to a psychiatrist that knows the population, that knows the community. Similar with mental health care, that's getting a little bit better, but the funding isn't there. Um, in the Caribbean, I remember, a lot of conversations when we talk about depression or anxiety, there's this immediate correlation to being under like spiritual attack, right? People who are dealing with depression are taken to church, you lay your hands on you, you get your oil, your water anointing for deliverance. I've heard it similar to friends from East Asia, right? If you talk openly about mental health, you bring dishonor to your family. I had a friend that got a lot of fallout on LinkedIn for making a post about autism and the struggles he faces with depression, and DMs directly to him from people in his community about why would you do that? Why would you talk about that? And then similarly in Indigenous communities, mental health and healing is usually a collective practice, right? You bring the family in, there's rituals that go along with it. So to take that from a communal practice to an individual one on a phone or on an app, um, there it is again, cultural implications and innovation coming to a head, kind of, colliding with each other. How do we solution for both? If you were a product manager in Silicon Valley or New York City and you were charged with creating a solution for doing the ideation for something that could provide support to these communities, is asking one of the individuals from East Africa or East Asia, from the Caribbean, or from our native community in the United States to disclose or self-disclose symptoms, would that be the right way to, and right, I use air quotes, but would that be the best way to provide support for them in that space? Are we overexposing them to things that may be harmful by asking them to do that? Are there other ways that we can reach them, reach these communities without providing that prescriptive way that we know may work for the broader community? And if we, as technologists, as solutionists, as systems thinkers, um, don't think about these things, right? Don't plan for them, don't prepare for them, um, our blind spots will show. And this is where it happens, right? Looking for support, and it's only in English. A lack of accessibility for our low vision or low hearing individuals that may also want to leverage the technology. Minimal representation of diverse faces or voices, right, in the user experience. A lot of time, I think now things are getting a little bit better with that, but we're still leaving out um, a lot of marginalized folks because we are not actively planning, preparing, researching, or solutioning for it. data privacy models, right? That, inability to download your data, everything isn't backed up into the cloud, or, giving people more ownership over the information that they provide. All of these things can spurn on or trigger mistrust in the communities that we want or we intend to support and to serve. But there are people out there who are doing awesome things with the information that they have and with their commitment to diversity and inclusion. And these are my two favorite. The Friendship Bench in Zimbabwe is a project that trains grandmothers to provide talk therapy in their communities. It's a natural thing, uh, specifically in the Black community and Caribbean community. When you have problems or there's issues or whatever, you reach out to your elders, something that's deeply rooted in who we are as people. To see that idea operationalized on a larger scale to provide support, it's awesome. You can find out a lot about the Friendship Bench online on YouTube. And then similarly, I'd heard about this a while ago. I was in the Netherlands last year and saw this again, but it's called Dementia Village Associates in the Netherlands. They believe in deinstitutionalization of care, and they strive to include those with dementia in society. So here they have led or have leveraged their community beliefs around inclusion and the valuing and the validation of elders to continue to create spaces for them to live and to thrive by embedding that in the way that they provide care to these folks. That's innovation. And that is awesome, right? And taking a big problem, respecting the values that exist in those communities, but still providing the solution. I think that's the direction that we all want to go in as we move forward. So, what design future would you think, looking at your community of origin, where you are from, what design feature would make a mental health app feel safer and more relevant for your community? Is there one thing? Are there many things? Think about who you are, your culture, your family. What is one assumption that you would challenge if you had the opportunity? And if you can, you could drop your answer in the chat. So as I head towards close, just have a couple big questions. This presentation is kind of like in workshop mode. I'm kind of pulling together the ideas, maybe something that I definitely continue to write about. But as responsible people who know better, as technologists and product managers and clinicians and advocates, not just for sound mental health practices, but for responsible digital innovation, what are some of the things that we can do to ensure that we are not creating additional harm and that we are including those that need to be included? I'll give a few things that I've been thinking about. One is definitely center lived experience. A lot of times we come up with an idea, and I'm guilty of this, and you think your idea is the best thing since sliced bread, and you run with it, but you forget that validation. You forget to center the lived experience of the people that we want to solution, and we don't include them in the process of creation and refinement and scaling. And that would be the first thing I would do. Invite historically excluded communities to co-create the tools that you are developing. Include multiple generations, older people, younger people. Sometimes I'll ask, my sister, and she would think it's a great idea. Then I'll run the idea by my dad, and he's like, no, and he calls out 50 things that I didn't see or think about. There's so much value in that, but it has to be intentional. We have to be willing to bring other people to the solutioning table and to co-create with them. We need as many perspectives as are feasible for this refinement. And then also build cultural context into user experience and then into the AI, right? Not as an afterthought, but as part of the design pillar. I was actually looking for this book right before I joined, but Teresa Torres is one of these great product leaders that talks about the importance of the product trio, right? Engineering and the back end so important because we need our tool or solution to actually work, right? And then we need our product manager, sorry, to be able to um, put that problem that we're solving for our customer at the forefront. They are the ones that prioritizes that voice and make sure that whatever solution that we create focuses on that. But then lastly, we also have that design person, right? That's often left out. They get the extra end of the startup budget, whatever's left over. Then we bring in design, right, to kind of help to refine what we're creating. Design, I believe, is as equally important as engineering and product. It's not a nice to have. How can we solve problems comprehensively without centering our user? We can't. We also have to be willing to challenge the algorithmic bias because equity and inclusion isn't a happenstance. It's something that you have to plan for and you have to um, include not by accident. It has to be intentional. Understand how data works, understand how models are trained, learn to understand how this will all impact your solution if you are leveraging AI, and then plan for it. So for technologists, examine the belief systems in their products. If you're a clinician, advocate for tools that include multiple personas and respects diverse belief systems or realities. And then lastly, prioritize the building of ecosystems that heal without harming. I know it's a very ambiguous concept at times to think about what that means to heal without harming. But by breaking down, systematically breaking down your solution and including others, there are things that they may be able to call out that you may not see in your creation. Uh, Last October, I had an opportunity to go to a really cool conference that brought underrepresented individuals into the space in fintech, and I had exposure to founders and product folks and engineers, all types of stuff. And we were all kind of charged at the end of that conference to kind of go into the world and be great and do something. And I wanted to find a way to create inclusion for people that existed all around the globe where they could feel comfortable in learning and sharing and growing and developing together. So I founded a small social enterprise called Diaspora Digital Diaspora, obviously a play on words of diaspora, African diaspora. And the idea is to unite innovators across the globe and across cultures. We have this amazing connection between Africa, the continent, and then the Caribbean and Africa and South America and in the United States. And there's so many similarities there in the way that uh, in our belief structures, but there are many differences. And bringing those voices together uh, to innovate, I think, is something that we need more of. So that's why I founded this social enterprise. Our main goal right now is to create intergenerational mentorship hubs where diverse perspectives aren't just included, but they're prioritized. So solutioning, again, using innovation, solutioning for diversity ultimately is what we want to do and to create products that are designed with equity and inclusion at the forefront. I've seen firsthand how, a team in India, versus a team in the US versus a team in South America approach app design completely differently than, someone that sits here in Tampa, Florida with me. All approaches are valid, right? All are necessary. And just being able to sit in this circle, this intercultural circle of solutionists, adds so much value to the end result, to the end design. So how are we prioritizing this incorporation of multiple points of view something that I'd like to see at the forefront with diaspora, something that I create the system or the structure for, and then bring people to a space where those voices, all of those voices are valued, heard, and supported. So, coming to the end, if you find yourself sitting in a space where you're charged with thinking through ideation or design process for a solution that can provide support and help to people who are in crisis, and you look around and you see you have a great team, what are the steps that you're taking to ensure that everything is prioritized, all the voices, all the identities, all the personas are prioritized and included? First question is asking who's not here. Are there other people that can be here to help us go through this process? What assumptions are we making about those people? Who is this healing for, right? Um, and then how can we make what we're building safer for those individuals? And this may not be one meeting or two meetings. This should be, sorry, something that you come back to throughout your product journey, throughout the app journey, creation journey. For mental health, it's definitely something to think about and to include and to prioritize. Definitely believe that technology should amplify human connection and not replace it. We're living in a new renaissance, if you will, a AI renaissance where we have access to so much, but I think at times that is the problem. We want to in the inclusion of everything, there's the inclusion of nothing or no one, right? Drill down on who it is we are trying to support and ultimately um, prioritize their voice, center their experience, and listen. I believe belief systems, whether cultural or institutional or digital, shape how we think and how we experience mental health and wellness. So, as we continue to innovate and to create solutions for various types of people, is so important to disrupt narratives that may have come before us that are being perpetuated. We need to disrupt those and replace them with things that are valuable and um, healing added, if you will, and to encode these new ones, right, into the technology that we are creating. I believe that we're going to see a future, hopefully, where mental health tools are equitable, they're human centered, um, and then most importantly, that they resonate culturally with the people that they are intended for. Like me, back when I was growing up in the Caribbean, something that would speak to me, not something that I could only take one or two or three features out of and had to trash the rest. Um, where technology doesn't replace human connection, it amplifies it. AI shouldn't be the be all and end all, it should be an add on to something that we scope and develop and scale that is inclusive. So no matter where, everyone, regardless of their background, I think feels seen and heard and included. So our homework, I believe, at this point, as someone who is in this space and someone who's interested in seeing this through and seeing this build and scale and develop to include others, um, think about one question or one comment that we can use in our toolbox when we are sitting in these spaces to ask about inclusion the next time that you build or create or ideate or help to refine a digital health tool or digital solution, something that impacts humanity as a whole. What is that one question or call out that you can use in these spaces to help spur this along a little bit more? Because I think these small shifts in the way that we think and the questions that we ask in these spaces will create huge shifts in the outcomes and in the end solutions. And I believe ultimately that's how you create impact by writing the systems around these journeys. Um, we will be able to make positive and incremental and instrumental change in the world around us. So lastly, let me go to my last slide. Thank you. Thank you, Debbie, for Becky, sorry for allowing me to have this conversation and to kind of workshop this idea and bring it out. I've been following you for such a long time, and I love that you um, pull us all together to have these conversations and to kind of keep our toes to the fire to think about how we can leverage the technology around us to make the world better, and to essentially be braver to ask these big questions, because if we're not doing it, then who will? So thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. Wow, I took a lot of notes. I really appreciate that presentation. We've got about 10 minutes left. And so, Malika, do you want to kickstart questions?
Yes, I actually have hundreds of questions. I will just ask one because I want to leave space for other people. But I want to touch on like the initial conversations that you started talking about, some issues about like mental health stigma that people are like basically instead of inviting people to therapy, they are just saying pray or stay strong. I just wanted
Oh,
to
yeah.
touch on that, like coming from Middle East, I can say that this is also a very important thing to note about gender norms. So on the one hand, of course, we have different representations of system in different genders, and culture is also another value that we see here. So in most of the in Middle East, most of the time that women, when they want to seek mental health support, they might mislabel to being attention seekers, which is something that is still people struggling. But I see a very, very interesting potential here for digital mental health because just because of this issue that people don't want to go in person or someone else know that they are under the therapy, they prefer like other means from like virtual therapy or like getting distance therapy. So I see a huge potential here for digital mental health that can support specifically women that they are kind of they because of the stigmas and because of the social barriers they are not willing to like engage in uh social like in-person therapists.
Mhm.
So this is something that I wanted to touch on. I know it might be a bit a different culture that might not resonate with so many people here, but this is an important thing to note that gender norms in different cultures and different countries, how important they are and how digital mental health can save so many people in this context.
I think that is an awesome point. Starting first with the gender issue, men specifically, men don't usually, historically speaking, finding uh, men actively and willingly involved in the therapeutic process, seeking out therapy and individual therapists. I know in the US and in the Caribbean specifically, lots of stigma, lots of says directly. I think there's a direct correlation for many people between, needing mental health support and, you know, masculinity and the weakness that, they perceive they may be experiencing as a result of needing those support services. So digital technology does provide that intermediary, that pathway, right, to support, and can definitely be leveraged that way. One way that I've seen uh, digital innovation also work for women, for Caribbean women, is virtual support groups, right? So here it is, we are leveraging technology. There may be an app or a message board or something like that that they can utilize, but then maybe once a week or bi-monthly, there's a live therapist on the app providing a support circle, multiple women, and the ability to kind of create a rapport and a connection and still have those elements, of community that we instinctually, culturally look for present in those spaces. So that is absolutely, spot on, Malika.
You've got iPhone. I don't really know how else to identify you, but please go ahead.
I'm sorry, it's Edmund. So I left the office and I just decided to connect with my phone. Thank you so much, Cassandra. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much, Cassandra, for this amazing talk. And I think I'd like us to further this conversation because we share the same idea on value sensitive designs and so on. So I think it would be a very nice collaboration. I
So
just wanted to follow up with Malik's question. So, and the last point that you made, where you said that technology ought to amplify social connection rather than distort that. Wouldn't it be that we are not really addressing the problem of the stigma and we're just running into technological accountability? Because right now people are just going to hide behind this screen, but the stigma still continues to proliferate. So let's say, for instance, in South Africa, men wouldn't seek. Let me not generalize, but there is a stigma about seeking mental health therapy and all of that. But when I engage with men, most of the conversations that always erupt is that the reason why we are depressed, or the reason why I am depressed, let's say individual level, the reason why I'm depressed, it's mostly because of economic issues. It's not because I have trauma or all of this. But now there is this bandwagon that men ought to go for therapy. And whereas the main problem is not addressed, just like in the aspect of stigma, the stigma itself is not addressed. It's just people just hiding behind the screen. So how do you think we can bypass or circumvent issues like that? Thank you.
that's a great question. And I think you're right. Um, Stigma definitely can pervade despite, right, this creation or orchestration of new systems. And, we have to remember that we're talking about battling against something that is counter to the culture that we all grew up in generationally. So we can't expect that we'll see a full turnaround or change, right? In a way of thinking or viewing mental health support overnight, but by providing different inroads or pathways or structures or supports that people can build their comfortability with the conversation or the subject matter in a space that's safe with other people that look like them from the same culture, that's where you open minds, right? And that's where I think sometimes through their own personal individuated experience, they then start to see, okay, there is some value here that I can use, right? And if it's went from 0 to 50%, right? That's a win. And we kind of have to look at it that way incrementally as opposed to 0 to 100%. So for example, in my support groups, facilitating support groups for a very long time, I think this is where you would see that. And oftentimes as a result, I use myself as an example. I'll talk about my own experience a lot from, my own background to where I am today and how specific things helped me in specific ways and keeping focus on those specific things, hoping that through those experiences, just an overall appreciation for what mental health services can do will kind of erupt. And usually that's how it is. If people have a very strict understanding or belief system that prevents them from seeing value of the big picture, find a specific thing that they can utilize that will solidify the benefit for them. And then from there, incrementally grow with the hope that, you start to kind of change uh, the way they see the entire solution.
Thanks, Edmund. So we've got, let's say, 2 minutes left. Either a last question or any final thoughts, Kassandra?
Any other questions? No. Well, I again just thank you for the opportunity. Um, Mental health, I think being that I've seen so many segments of the mental health picture, right? As someone finding services and looking for culturally competent clinicians to, being on in an inpatient unit and trying to understand people in crisis and to be a support for them, it always kind of brings me back to the place of how can we create solutions that provide some relief, uh, benefit for people where they don't have to sacrifice their cultural identity in order to be healed. There shouldn't be a trade-off, right? Or one or the other. It should be all together. And I welcome you all to reach out and to connect with me, because this is a space that, you know, keeps me thinking and keeps me reading and trying to learn more. And being that you all are experts in your fields, definitely would like to continue this discussion. I did have 3 resources that I wanted to share that kind of brought and it brings me to putting all of this together. Just 3 great books I have in my library. One is How Design Makes the World. Have to thank Dave Hoffer for that. He is a product leader, was when I worked at PwC, and he told me to buy that book and to read it. And it really, really kind of blew my mind, and how design definitely adds so much value. So if you haven't read that book, definitely read it. Continuous Discovery Habits. That's the Teresa Torres book that I talked about. And then lastly, this one, Thinking in Systems, kind of helps with everything. Helps you break down problems and have a better understanding of how all of these different layers or identities and systems kind of come together, and how we can solution for those issues that present. So three resources. Definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I believe it's on Becky's site. Would love to continue the conversation. And Becky, as always, thank you for your support, for being such an awesome person and an inspiration. And guaranteed, when I make it to the UK this fall, we'll have a coffee or some tea.
That sounds
Thank you.
good. And I will put all your